The question of the day is, what do I do if my spouse is not a Christian? That's a hard one.
1 Corinthians 7. Let's turn to it. Yeah, what do I do if my spouse is not a Christian? And hopefully you did not marry with an unequal yoke. Hopefully you got saved.
Afterwards.
Yeah. Hopefully you didn't have the poor judgment as a Christian to marry somebody who's not a Christian. Hopefully you didn't do that. If you did, I feel bad for you.
But the end result is the same. So.
Yeah. 1 Corinthians 7, let's look in verse 12 through 15. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 12. But to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which hath an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, but now are they holy. But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. So what we've got going on here in verse 14, where it says the unbelieving spouse is sanctified by the other one, not saved,
Right.
but in some sense set apart by the other one, by the godly influence of the other one. So salvation isn't automatic, for sure. We know that. But there is a positive influence that you can have on your unchristian spouse, and that you can have, and that you should have, and that you ought to have in your dealings with him or her. But it says right here, when one person in the marriage gets saved and the other one doesn't, don't bust up the marriage, Stay with them, try to do something with them, do something for them. But understand that if they leave you, verse 15, but if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. So one of the legitimate grounds for divorce and remarriage is desertion. It's one that a lot of the brethren, they don't like, but when people leave, they don't usually stay celibate. And as soon as that flesh leaves flesh, doctrinally speaking, that's a divorce. But more back to the question of what to do if your spouse is not a Christian and you are. You want to have as good of a testimony as you can before him or her. You want to watch your speech. You want to watch your actions. You want to put a lot of prayer on them. Let's come to 1 Peter chapter 3. And in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 1, there's an example of a woman changing a man's mind, not by nagging, but by consistent godly living before him. Now, this word conversation in Old English, it includes speech, but it's not limited to speech.
Also
it includes
actions.
behavior. Yeah, it includes actions here. 1 Peter 3:1. Why don't you read that in verse 2 for us?
Likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives, while they behold your chaste conversation coupled with fear.
Yeah, so your conduct and testimony and influence before the other spouse is going to make a difference.
Absolutely.
And generally, just browbeating them continually day and night and day, or when you're going to come to church. How come you're not coming to church, man? Why don't you come to church, man? Blah, blah, blah. That's not going to be as effective as loving them and treating them with respect and letting your actions do the talking.
And if you got saved after you were married, they're going to see a change in you.
They
And
ought to.
They ought to.
Yeah.
And that's important. That change that they're going to see, they're going to be like, maybe, make them more interested in what you have. So that is one way, definitely, like we talked about with your behavior and how you treat them and all of that.
That's true. You may think of it like this. You may find it helpful to think about in dancing. In the dancing situation, if you're dancing with someone and you change your step, they're going to have to change their step too, whether they feel like it or not.
Like in ballroom dancing, the man leads the woman in different directions, and you can just tell by the movement that you need to respond. Like if he goes forward, you go back. And that's kind of how marriage is. It's a dance. You have to work together and work with each other.
Yeah, so if you change your step and you change how you're dealing with your spouse carefully and prayerfully, it'll have an impact. It'll make a difference. It will definitely make a difference.
Like if there's a lot of yelling and loudness in the house, and then suddenly, speaking from a woman, say, the woman gets saved, and all of a sudden, she starts telling her husband that she loves him and treating him with respect, and that's going to make a huge difference in the marriage. And the man's going to see that and notice that something is very different about this woman that he married. And they're both going to be happier in a relationship like that, but ultimately, that's going to help him hopefully come to the Lord. Now, you can't force it. I wish I could kind of like hold some of my family members down and make them get saved. Wish it worked that way, but it doesn't. It has to deal with their heart and if they're open to it.
That's true. When someone gets saved, they change their trust from trusting themselves to trusting Jesus Christ, and you can't make them do that. In closing, I mentioned to you that there was a lady and she got saved, and her husband didn't want anything to do with church, didn't want anything to do with the Bible, didn't want anything to do with God. And so she realized after some years had gone by that he just was not going to trust Christ, at least not anytime soon that she could see. Now, she prayed for him and dealt with him, did everything she could for him. But she made up her mind to be the best wife possible she could possibly be for him, and just try to make him as happy as she could make him without ruining her conscience, And one of her friends asked her about it one time, and she said, well, this is as close to heaven as he's ever going to get. And when he dies, he's going to go to hell. So I'm going to make his time here as pleasant as I can make it, because this is as close as he's going to get.
It's a sobering thought.
It's a sobering thought. And hopefully that gentleman came around there. Hopefully he did. But if he didn't, she had just made up her mind that she was going to be a good, godly, sober Christian wife, the best wife she could be. And if her husband was not interested in God, church, the Bible, or Jesus Christ, well, that was just his loss. And she was still going to be as good a wife to him as she could be.
And she was very faithful to church, too. Yeah.
Yep. So that's the answer to today's Bible question. If you have a Bible question, please put it in the comments below. We'll have a go at it. And until then, the Lord bless you.